All right, guys, let's get started. I'm very excited to kick this off. My name is Debbie Madden. I'm the founder and CEO of Stride Consulting. We are an agile software development consultancy. And I like to say that our superpower is really collaborative, non-dogmatic software development, whether that be augmenting teams or full end-to-end design to delivery. Today is a really exciting day. We are kicking off a speaker series on leading through adversity. The last few months has certainly been a volatile whirlwind, and it's not over yet. And there's a lot of noise going on. Everyone wants to give you advice, share their tips. And our goal here is really to bring together 10 of the best organizations and speakers in the world to bring to you tips for how to lead during uncertain times, which I think is really important. Our focus is going to be for tech organizations and tech teams, but the content truly is broader than that. We're going to start off today with Sequoia, who is an outstanding company, and over the last weeks and months, they have developed this really rich return to work center with content and best practices. And should we return to the office? How are we going to return to the office? Do we want to return to the office? And so we're going to kick the series off today with some tips about how and when it's safe to return to the office. After the event, we will be recording it and sending it out because I think this content is going to be really great for not only those here today, but for everybody. Also, I would encourage you to go to stridenyc.com/events. We have 9 more talks after this on the pandemic of anxiety, how to pivot your business, outcomes over outputs. So really, really good stuff. And then last, before I hand it over to Sequoia, a couple of housekeeping tips. If you have a question, we're going to do, some light kind of either some slides or some best practices from the Sequoia folks. And then we want to open it up for questions. If you have a question at the bottom of your screen, click on participants. Then you'll see a green circle with a check mark in it. Click that yes button, and then we'll call on you, we'll unmute you or whatever. We'll call on you to ask your question, and you can verbally ask your question. At the end, I'm going to share a slide with contact information for Sequoia so that you can ask your questions after the talk as well. And then we advise you to put your Zoom on speaker view so that you can see the person talking and then just kind of remain on mute otherwise. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sequoia, and I'll introduce Michele from Sequoia, and you can introduce the talk and the rest of the team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. We're real excited to be part of your inaugural webinar here. So thanks for the opportunity, and excited to kind of share what we've been learning and understanding about the return to work or the return to office and the lessons learned for both Sequoia as well as from the talking to all the clients. So I want to start off as we have for all of our topics tied to this COVID-19 era, which is like this is a constantly moving discussion and evolving as a lot of legislative and other kinds of factors that always need to be reviewed frequently, and just want everyone to know that as we kind of go through the topics today and just kind of give you guys the input and thoughts that we have. A little bit about how we're going to organize the time. Very brief intro on Sequoia, just so you kind of know and can kind of gauge and understand the perspective we have on this topic. Then from a leadership standpoint, really looking at what all company leaders are going through with the COVID and the return to work. Now, I'll stop and just say this is probably one of the largest misnomers in the history of misnomers is the concept of return to work, because I'm pretty sure if you're on this call, you've been working a lot lately, but that is the moniker that we're using moving forward, and I can't wait to rename it down the road. But so anything that has to do with returning to the office place, obviously your workforce that stays at home also needs to be addressed and considered. But looking at what that really means for employers, picking up the agenda here, looking at a framework that we developed at Sequoia to help companies really size up the problem and the solution. We'll take a couple minutes and talk about really our product and engineering story, because during this time we've had to be insanely productive and ambitious in our product development, because as Debbie mentioned, we actually decided to have a product that supported our clients' needs for this, and that certainly goes. I'll give you a quick introduction to what that is in case that's of interest to you, and then we'll finish with questions and answers. So before I go any further, I also wanted to just take a moment and, we work with a lot of healthcare workers in our business. Some of you may have relatives or friends who are part of either the healthcare workers or the essential workers. And just thank everyone, because they're what's kind of keeping us all moving forward during this time, and they're certainly putting themselves in line, and we appreciate that. I know our employees do at Sequoia and our families do at home. So so what is this crazy world we're in right now, and how are we, going to re-enter the workplace? What are some of the factors that we need to think about? One thing that we know for sure, as we, Sequoia, rolled up our sleeves and started thinking about a return to the workplace, we realized right away that this is a very complex and risky and dynamic situation. And the punchline here is, like I alluded to before, it's going to continue moving forward in a constant and evolving way. So it's not something that's solved in a webinar, solved in one planning meeting. You have to prepare to be evolving with the topic as it goes. And it's certainly at the center of it for anybody in leadership is obviously the safety of the people, right? Your employees and even their families, right? And so it's like trying to balance and understand, how do you safely and responsibly take care of your people? How do you regain some of that engagement your culture used to have when they were all in the same building? And then how do you also navigate the pretty sizable compliance and liability boundaries that you need to stay within as you move forward? So we'll try to help you unpack some of that today. You'll be hearing from Steve Kim, who's our Chief Legal Administration Officer, Sean Handel is the Chief Product Officer, Vivek Rajana, who is the VP of Products for us, and I'll be kind of like our MC as we go through it. So there's your motley crew of presenters today. You can tell we did not get where we got to just on good looks. All right, so a little bit about Sequoia. And again, just to give you a sense of who we are and where we're pulling our understanding in our information from. So we're a tech-enabled consulting and services company. We really do focus on helping what we like to refer to as people-first or people-driven companies really get the most out of their investment in people. And our secret sauce has always been that we have, we believe in technology's role in bringing things together and really unifying and taking out artificial seams in the experience. We are very proud of the expertise that we have from our 19 years of business, and we try to infuse that into everything we do. And we tap into our community. We like bringing our clients into the discussion and leveraging their knowledge and making that part of the experience. And of course, we address things, everything from healthcare, and you can see it on the list here, HR and payroll outsourcing, compliance, a lot of the kind of more complex and sometimes, obviously very sensitive data, sometimes icky, complex stuff, but that's just where we've always been. And so when we thought about our approach to return to work, the role we fit, we felt like we had enough expertise to really be able to put something viable in front of our clients' needs. These are our clients, so the kinds of companies we attract and we love to support, again, are employers of choice, people who are really thinking hard about the environment and the experience that they're setting up for their people, and they tend to invest, and they want to do that in a smart way, in a way that really gets them the ROI of that investment in people so they can remain an employer of choice. We've got some great clients in New York. And very proud of our office there and the kind of help we've been able to do for companies in the New York technology scene. And then finally, one of the things about Sequoia that has given us a lot of perspective of company needs for their return to work is the fact that we have solutions for companies of all sizes, and we're able to kind of look and consider what's the need of a startup, and as they grow, maybe they're outsourcing, then they insource and they go to a different kind of model all the way up to self-insurance or other kinds of approaches to take advantage of their scale and leverage. And sometimes companies, have to come down this scale gracefully as well. So we help them with that. But it gives us a very complete view of clients' needs as they grow and scale and as they evolve in maturity. And a big part of our return to work program was the fact that we have a platform in place that unifies the data for leadership and management and for employees. We've traditionally done this to help people get the most value out of things like healthcare and retirement plans and risk management. And it was a very natural extension for us to put a return to work solution on the platform for the same reasons, because it really brought all that information together for the management and leadership teams, but it also had the connection to employees, which is the mobile app, to help them have that communication. So that's a little bit about Sequoia. I want to turn it over to Steve Kim to really kind of size up. Again, if you're in the leadership team of your company and you're kind of trying to really understand what's the important factors that really do dictate and should inform your return to work strategy, I wanted to hand it over to Steve to walk us through some of that.
Great. Well, thank you, McKelly. And hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Just as a warning, as it turns out, there's some work going on outside my house. So hopefully with the earbuds, you're not going to hear a lot of pounding. But if it gets particularly loud, I'll go off to mute momentarily. I'll get to the next slide. So I'm going to just try to set up the discussion. And what you'll hear today is really an outgrowth of Sequoia's own sort of work and struggle to try to think about how to start bringing people back. And we had a webinar a little bit earlier this month, and we had Josh Person, who's one of the premier analysts in the HR space, on, and he gave this. He had this sort of stark, dire slide. Right? It was, I think, everyone's been living through this, so I won't belabor it, but it was sort of unrelenting up and to the right from a stock market standpoint. And I don't know about everyone here, but for me, COVID only started to seep into my consciousness in sort of the mid to late February timeframe. I'd been reading the reports and sort of had an increasing amount of alarm, but it really started to hit home for me personally, kind of in that February timeframe. I think it was early March when here in the Bay Area in Santa Clara County, there was the first reported case of community spread. And I think at Sequoia, that's when things started to really accelerate. And if you look all the way to the right, I mean, that is the definition of a black swan event, right? Defied planning, it defied expectation, and there was a precipitous decline, both in the market and from that time in late Feb to now, right, you had 14, close to 15% unemployment. So that is the reality we're living in. And if we go to the next slide, and so Josh and his group has been doing some sort of pulsing of their clients. And if you look in the first half of April, it's not unexpected that the number one concern that people had was job security. If you see in the prior slide, 15% unemployment, that is, of course, what people are concerned about. And most importantly also is personal health. So if you can contrast that with what happened 2 weeks later, maybe this evidences some stabilization in people's attitude to what's going on. Even in the face of such high unemployment and the continuing spread of the virus, the number one concern has shifted away from job security to actually working from home. And in the blue box, you see, if you combine some of the scores, it's work-life balance. And that's probably because, right, there are no more boundaries between work and home life because we're all doing it in the same place. And if we go to the next slide, what that tells me is that there is definitely a desire on some, for some people and some companies to get back to the office. But it's funny because what used to be simple, getting on the subway or a bus or hopping in your car to get to your office, is now essentially a regulated industry. There's guidance by state, by OSHA, there are guidelines from the CDC, and now there's just a whole plethora of things that employers need to consider to make their workplace safe before they bring people back. And so, at Sequoia, we've been thinking about the same. And I'd say for me, kind of in the early April timeframe, here at Sequoia, we started to try to think through what would it take to bring some people back. And it is, as it says, it is complicated and it's risky, right? Because people's lives are at stake and there are all sorts of considerations. Even if you feel like you have a safe work environment, then you have to figure out who comes back. And if they come back, should your your open floor plans start to look like a semiconductor plant with gloves and face masks and protective gear. And so it's hard to even know, hard to know where to start. And so if we go to the next slide, I think, for us at Sequoia and me personally, and everyone here at Sequoia is part of the leadership team that's sort of working through these issues. To me, it boils down to kind of two areas that you need to feel confident in to even start. One, there's a whole cottage industry now of checklists and white papers and law firm client alerts. And I personally find them not very useful because they don't apply to our business. And I always have this nagging suspicion of what is it leaving out. And so you can go through this endless exercise of trying to consolidate checklist after checklist, and you still might not feel confident that you've got all the bases covered, or maybe it's so weighty that it's hard to actually make it digestible. So that's one, confidence that I know what choices to make and can I even make those choices. Once you have that nailed down, even if you have the most complete, most thorough, and most defensible checklist, ultimately you have to feel confident that you can execute. It's one thing to say that everyone who comes back needs to get tested for exposure, but if your employees don't have access to testing in an easy to get way, then the plan falls apart. So the other side of it is you need to feel confident that you can actually execute the plan that's in place. And so that's what we've been working on at Sequoia. And through those efforts, trying to work through those issues, we came up with an approach for ourselves. And because of that, we feel like we kind of owe it to our client base to be able to bring it to them as well. So that's what we'll cover. And so I'm actually going to keep going, and I'll go to the first pillar here on creating policies. And I'd say, policies get a bad rap, and even I say that as a company's lawyer. Too often, and it's understandable, if you have an employee handbook or a T&E policy, you almost never look at it, and that's because it's old hat, and you might have to click accept it when you join, but then you never look at it again. I think returning to work should be different. It must be different, right? You owe it to your employees, and I, as an employee, before I go in, I want to understand exactly how is the company going to operate, what is the expectation for my behavior when I get into the office, and what is the company, and what should I do to protect my colleagues. So like I said, there's no shortage of resources out there, and law firms now, for example, have built up a lot of expertise around this and are ready, willing, and able to help. It could be 50 to 60 hours of billable, so that's an expensive proposition. But even if you were to do that, there's a challenge still. Do you have everything covered? And regulations are changing constantly. Both in New York and California, where we have offices, we've had to update our own policies as new regulations have come along. So that's the challenge. And if we go to the next slide, so what has Sequoia done? How have we figured out what our policy should be? Well, it starts with some core guidance from the EEOC. I think, back in late April, as companies started to focus on this, many of the questions come and fall in a number of categories, but this in particular. What is the interplay between health and privacy? Right, so I, as an employer, let's say I want all my employees to be tested. Can I even ask them before they come in? Like, doesn't that impact HIPAA, for example? Well, the EEOC came out with guidance talking about this very issue. And they declared, the government has declared, that COVID-19 is a pandemic. And the consequence of that is that employers now, their responsibility shifted a bit to make sure that the workplace is as safe as possible. Now, so that means employers can ask questions with that in mind. But they can use that from a safety standpoint, those types of questions that feel medical and feel like they're private. You cannot take those answers into account when you're making job-related decisions. Okay, so that is for, in my mind, sort of a baseline. Next, once you have that sort of settled, there are some core principles that employers need to consider and ultimately to document for everyone's benefit. So sort of leveraging the fact that this has been declared a pandemic, now there's a whole raft of regulations that spring up from that. So OSHA has already pre-existing set of guidelines on what it means for a workplace to be safe. And often people think about this in a manufacturing standpoint, but now, you know, open floor plan is a potentially hazardous work site. And so in the COVID environment, OSHA actually has some very specific guidance that needs to be put in place. We talked about the EEOC. So this is sort of the push and pull of what companies need to do. Document and outline all the things you're going to do for workplace safety, but still make sure that your policies and your practices reflect that there's only a very limited set of people who have access to that information. And so now that you have sort of those principles in place, we go to the next slide. Now it becomes possible for employers to start making some conscious decisions, right? So different companies could say, you know, we can be tested once and that's enough. Or what we'll do at Sequoia is actually for ourselves is require periodic testing. So that is a choice employers can make. Another choice is what happens in between, right? Because you can test negative for COVID and then get exposed 2 days later. And so another choice that people can make is whether any kind of self-certification is required in between. And that's what we'll do at Sequoia and what we're recommending to our clients. At the very least, some sort of self-assessment question where people have to certify whether they're running a fever or they're exhibiting any of the other COVID-like symptoms. And then there's a number of other things that companies can choose. And so that's kind of the basics of a policy. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the tools we've created, because again, you can get 20 policies and then try to condense them into one. But you need a more methodical, easy-to-use way to help develop that. And you see in the first bullet, so we partnered with the law firm Wilson Sonsini, and they have a software subsidiary called 650. And they start with this intake set of questions, like over 40 questions that run the gamut of the things you should consider as you're developing the policy. So especially for those companies that have not started to put pen to paper, that's a fabulous way to start. And even if you have, this might expose some areas that you have. Okay. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So that's number one. Number two, for setting up testing and care, I want to throw it over to Sean Handel. Hey, Sean.
Hey, thanks, everyone. So Steve, thanks for the overview of the policy piece. For everyone on the call, one of the reasons we started with policy as the beginning of the return to work framework is because it actually dictates a lot of what you have to do downstream. So when you think about testing, for example, normally employers don't worry about where you get your health care. We're sort of the conduit for health insurance, but we don't typically get into the middle of you and your doctor's relationship, right? And mandate that you have to get tested for something. But in the new world with these new regulations, we're somewhat obligated to do that, to provide resources so that we can meet our obligations as an employer, to create a safe workplace, but also to effectively make it possible for us to create an environment where people can return to work safely. Navigating all that on their own is pretty difficult for the typical employee, at least today. So can you go to the next slide, please? And so, when we think about testing and care, there's really two parts of it. Part one is the employee getting tested to see if they're continuing to be healthy. And the other is, providing a work environment where you're creating a place where people can go be safe and feel safe when, for those employees who have to be back in the office. And so, the good news is that there is a lot of testing that's becoming available. It's still difficult to navigate, but it's going to become more and more available over time. We've seen, partnerships, with like One Medical, providing, access to care. Quest and others are now providing, testing services. But the problem the employees have is making sure that they're navigating, everything that's available and making sure it's available in their local area, based on their particular insurance provider, in their particular plan. You can go to the next slide, please. And so, one of the worries that we all have is, COVID is probably, the epidemiologists predict that it's going to come in waves. And so, your planning, for how to deal with this at a workplace level is going to have to be based off of an assumption that the numbers are going to go up and then they're going to come back down as we implement new requirements and stringent policies. But we're going to have to adapt as things change. Next slide, please. So, when we talk about, providing tools and resources to your employees, here's a good example. One medical partner of ours, has provided a clinical guidance playbook. They have testing available, at testing sites and parking lots where you can go and, drive up. Steve actually did this last week, I believe. Drive up, get tested, get your results in a couple of days. And, that allows you to have the peace of mind as an employee that, you know your status, and allows your employer then to know that you're safe to return to the workplace. In addition to that, though, we really have to think about the mental and emotional state of all of our employees. It's really not easy to be working at your home office 24/7, and especially if you have young kids at home. So everyone has a different situation. And so, we believe that it's important to consider the whole person, not just the physical medical part, that we're all dealing with. Next slide, please. So as an employer, again, you're going to suddenly have a lot to deal with that wasn't on your agenda 3 months ago. So you're going to be providing masks for your employees, most likely. Hand sanitizer. Who's going to be wiping down the conference room doors? Are you testing at the front door, with the infrared scanner? Are you shipping thermometers to people at home? Are you expecting them to buy them? Which ones are validated to be accurate? There's a lot of questions that you're going to need to work through. And, these are things that if you do planning up front, you can have a pretty clean rollout to your employee base where what they are experiencing at the office feels good to them. It is safe for them. And what they're doing at home, provides a level of support that allows them to continue to work in that hybrid environment. And so some of the key things, right now, you should be looking at, who your partners are from a medical perspective. Again, you don't normally get into this, but you really do need to think about providing access to the right partners for your employees, either testing or well-being solutions. Working on, people's at-home situations, because no matter who comes back to the office, they're probably going to be spending some portion of their time at home, and a large portion of your employee base may stay at home for a while. What's your cohort strategy so that you can isolate who gets infected? Who is conducting the ongoing retesting, screening, treatment, and how often is that happening? What are your protocols for cleaning the office? How do you do that when you have people coming in different shifts? You have to make sure that you've scheduled all that out, and providing all those other resources that are necessary for the whole person. Okay.
Thank you, Sean. All right, Steve, let me bring it back over to you to just describe really what the cohort management process is all about.
Sure. So as we're walking through these pillars, right? So we set up policies which reflect all the choices that a company wants to make before they bring people back. And then the critical first step that Sean talked about is making sure that people have been tested. And so now this is a stage where you're actually running the play. You've sort of identified some employees who should come back, and we'll talk a little bit about how that could look. And so, you feel like you have things under control. I think it's a risky time, though, right? All of that, as it says here, working from home was meant to suppress all the risks of being together in one place, not only from an employer liability standpoint, but also people's basic health and safety. And so now, if you reach the point where you want to bring people back, you're reintroducing all that risk and uncertainty. And so, how do you manage that? If you build one more. So this is, I'm not going to go through this. This is actually Sequoia's plan. So we took our policy and we converted it into an actual step-by-step plan. And I think later this week we'll be releasing some more material around this. But suffice it to say, if we go to the next slide, I think if we think about Sequoia's plan, there's two dimensions to it that are important. One is what are the phases of bringing people back? And for us, it's 3 phases. I think a lot of people are doing something similar to this, all kind of tied to some local requirements. Right? So there's the reopening blueprint in New York, and there's a 4-phase approach here in California, for example. And I think the fundamental premise at this stage is identifying which groups come back. I know some companies want to implement like a reservation system, right? So on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis, people can self-select in whether they go in or not. That is, that's an approach. The issue with that is if you are having a somewhat random population in your office from time to time, it gets much harder to manage, especially if someone ends up turning out to be sick and you want to go back and try to get to that group of people. So what we recommend is you define a specific cohort that comes in. For Sequoia, we've, in our first phase back, and we're going to start in Arizona in the middle of June, we have this concept of mission critical roles. So these are roles that are sort of critical to the operations of the company at large, not just of that function. And there's some fundamental enhancement by being in the office, either improving in security because of the type of information and the roles they play, or significant uptick in efficiency. So that's our first cohort, and we'll probably have 5 to 8 people going back to in our Arizona office. And so now you run the playbook. You make sure they get tested. You have them operate under the daily self-assessments. We're taking a look at temperature-taking kiosks at the threshold of the office. So you go in a contactless way. You stand in front of an iPad-looking thing, and it takes your temperature. So you just run all the tools that you have. And what that will allow us to do, and hopefully companies follow the same approach, is if the unfortunate does happen, and you have a specific cohort of employees who are coming in, and someone falls ill, then you know exactly who to contact to self-quarantine or to go send to test. Okay. And so, so what are the key actions here? It's really just putting into place everything you put into your policies. I know that's easier said than done. So, with supplies hard to come by, to have enough, for example, workstation cleaning supplies, that might be hard to have enough for daily wipe down or multiple wipe downs every day. And so, that's, as I said, could be easier said than done. But we at Sequoia, for our clients, are working on trying to get access to those kind of supplies in addition to.
Thank you, Steve. So educating and communicating with your people is central to keeping them engaged and keeping them feeling safe and informed on what the policies and protocols are. So I want to turn over to Sean quickly to talk about what's in this stage.
Yeah, the key thing here, just to realize, I guess, up front is you're basically going through a massive change management exercise. So you have people who transition from, working primarily at the office. Now they're working primarily at home, and now you have to get some of them back into the office. And so, communication cannot be, sort of overthought here. The ability to sort of help people understand what the plan is, understand what their role in the plan is, how that, executing on this plan together is going to keep them safe and healthy is actually one of the most important aspects. And so, we think that there, are key tools that you can use, things like a playbook that people can read and understand, the bigger picture. There's other tools like, communications tools, that we all use every day that help you share, updates around the program, help people understand if I'm coming back to the office, who's going to be there with me, things like that. So next slide. And this really does sort of, require elevation of, that relationship between the company and the employee. It's always been, important for people first companies like a lot of ours, to really have a strong relationship with people, but, with the employees. But now it requires even more support. Now you're getting into details about people's individual lives at home, which normally you wouldn't have to. And so you have to really think through, what the total impact on the person is and what your role is in supporting that. And through that, make sure that you're continually communicating what you're doing to support your people and what they are being asked to do in return to continue to make the workplace safe for themselves and others. And so, key things, develop your playbook, share it, make sure that people are very aware of it, over communicate, leverage your partners. You're not a medical provider, you're not a testing provider. Find partners who can do that. And make sure you're continuing to ask for feedback from employees. That's one of the most important things we found is ask and you'll find out. Don't ask, you're kind of in the, burying your head in the sand. And so it's really important to understand that people are going to have different perspectives, and you have to think through that, iterate, adjust, adjust as the situation around you changes.
Thank you, Sean. And then finally, 5, which is analyze and manage. Steve, let me turn it back over to you to close off the framework.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll go quickly because what Vivek and Sean will show after me is the tools and services that we put together that can actually help operate these 5 pillars. I just say, the analyze and manage stage for us is incredibly important because it's one thing to put in place a set of policies and procedures, but if you don't follow through with it, all sorts of bad things can happen. So this plays itself out in all sorts of ways in a company's life, like Sarbanes-Oxley. If you have internal controls but then don't follow it, you can get in trouble. Same thing here. As you start to bring people back and you say that they need to do certain things, and then you don't require it, or you don't follow through, or you can't show that they did it, that's just as bad as not having policies to begin with. And so, what does that mean? So, for us, there's a number of things that employers should track and make sure that they can get access to at any time. Like confirmation, have people been tested? Have they actually been doing the daily self-assessment that you say they should do? And is the employer sort of observing that and making sure that people are coming in if they, if they say they are actually running a fever? On the third bullet there's already been some stories circulating. I don't know if people here have seen it, but OSHA shows up at an office where people are back and they want to see your documentation. They want to see your injury illness prevention plan. And most employers don't even know what that is. If you're a tech company, you haven't put one in place. So these are things that are really important to do, not only from a compliance standpoint, but probably most importantly, as we talked about earlier, if there's a problem, because someone's gotten ill, and you have all the data flowing in, so you know who's self-certified and who's not, then you can take the remediation steps very quickly. And so, that means, what does that mean? That means you need to make sure you understand what you're measuring. You have to have people who are responsible for the program, and critically, you need a way to gather it securely and privately, right? If you're doing it in a Google Sheet, or if you have a dedicated HR email box for people to say whether they're sick or not, you probably violated some of the core privacy principles. So you need to be mindful on how you're actually analyzing and managing the program. Thanks for that.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So those are the 5 parts of the framework. Hopefully they were helpful for you to kind of size up, again, the problem and the solution and some of the activity there. And just wanted to open up, given the kind of audience we have today, I thought it'd be also useful for you guys to hear from Vivek Rajana, who's our VP of Product, and Sean, if you want to add color commentary. But really about what our path has been is we're iterating at a pretty intense pace software during this time, and just some of the lessons learned. And again, before we kind of do a quick intro to the Return to Work Standard and get to questions and answers. So Vivek, let me invite you up here. It's been an intense time. We have, like probably most companies, engineering and product folks in different places, and not just in the United States, but in the world. Maybe talk about some of the things that you did to adjust to help keep, us moving and, again, moving at a pretty high pace.
Yeah, yeah, sure, Michael, thank you. So we had teams both here in our San Mateo office as well as back in India, quite a big teams, and there was a lot of cross collaboration. So in that way, teams were adjusted to work on a remote basis. But then this kind of a COVID situation helped us to go 100% remote for many of the folks. So we needed to do some adjustment related to our communication. So we shifted entirely onto the Microsoft Teams, because that's what our internal communication is there. And then we reorganized the teams rather than based on the functional teams to the product-based teams, so that they communicate on a product to product basis. And then we have all the cross-functional teams coming into the product teams channel. And then we emphasize a lot on the documentation right now. So the Confluence has become a source of truth. Before it was a lot of collaborations and the whiteboarding session. Now we can't do those things. So we emphasize a lot on the documentation, and the Confluence is now turning out to be a valuable source for information. Now, to keep everyone on the same page and where the systems are there, we opened up the DevOps, but at the same time, we also needed to be much more secure in our access management method. So we created a deeper integration into the Microsoft Teams itself to understand where the products service lines are there and which of the releases are going, where are the whole pipeline is there. And we accelerated the continuous integration system, and it becomes like 100% mandatory. Before, like some of the teams were following, now every team is following this CI method, because this gives us a multiple day check-in, and we have a much better control in terms of how the whole product is flowing. And then we have also ensured that as we were bringing some of the newer people into the team, seniors spend a dedicated time in a day, so that they are brought up to the speed with our way of working and our method of communication, so that they don't feel isolated. And it's very essential that whenever the new team members come in, they gel with the team's way of working. I would say that this has been challenging, but then team is getting in a better at it. And now last but not the least is like evaluating a technical and support system, so that we have follow the sun kind of a model. Before we had a smaller gaps, but now with the RTW coming along, we want to make sure that we can follow the sun model for our systems operation and support, and that we are trying to put in place right now. So it has been in a definitely a challenging time, but the teams are coping up with all the modern tools what we have available for doing this kind of a work.
That's great. Thank you, Vivek. Again, we could dig into this when we get to the Q&A if people want to go deeper. So yeah, just rounding off this section here, you know, as it's been alluded to, we actually did create some software to help our clients. And really, the genesis of this was when we rolled up our sleeves to figure out how we were going to return to work, we realized software had to play a role in managing a lot of the moving parts, and our platform was a good place to put that. So, you know, if you're interested in this, like, again, I'll show you, go to Sequoia.com, of course, but just to kind of give everyone a quick anatomy lesson, there's a component for management, you know, to manage cohorts and get all your policies in one place, and get the resources you can share with employees. That's all in one experience here on the left side. And on the right side is the employee experience, right? So the consent and the acknowledgement and the kind of spot testing and all the different things you may or may not implement to manage your workforce before they enter into the office would happen from the mobile app. So for us, this was just an add-on module to the, you see the left-hand side, the other service lines that we help manage through the desktop and mobile experience for business and employees. You go to Sequoia.com, you know, RTW, return to work, and you'll see it on the homepage. You can see there's a whole section about the Return to Work Center and how it kind of helps companies and employees tackle the health and safety issue about returning to the workplace. And it's based on the framework, as you saw, the different features and capabilities we have. Automatic policy integration. You may be familiar with the law firm Wilson Sonsini. They have a really cool policy engine branded 650, and that's integrated into it to help you kind of maintain an ongoing kind of creative policy generation. One Medical is a strategic partner of ours. We've done a lot of integration of their content, and of course their service, if it's a good fit for companies, is a nice extension out of this as well. You know, Cohort Management is, you know, ripe for software. There's a lot of moving parts to that, and you need it in one place. You need to do it frequently. So that's a big component of it, and the kind of communication and education, connecting with your employees in their pockets where they have mobile phones and mobile apps, and having a, you know, private conversation with them about the consents and testing results. And so that's the Sequoia Return to Work Center. If you're interested, go to Sequoia.com. I'll trust you can find it. You can sign up even if you want to get there. And if you kind of like a lot of the content here, you have people in your organization that are interested, or you may be We do also have an ongoing webinar series on this topic. In fact, this Thursday is the next one where we really will get down to the real practitioner level of the 5 stages of the framework and hear from clients talking about their experience and stuff like that. So anyway, there's your plug on that. And Debbie, I think we can turn it over now, open it up for any questions or answers, or we can go deeper on anything that people may want to hear about, or whatever the audience would like. So I'll hand this back over to you.
Well, that's great, and I've been taking notes myself for our team here at Stride. So I really appreciate that holistic view, both in terms of how you guys are kind of dog fooding this yourselves, and the tech piece, the planning piece, the execution piece, because it really is an ongoing, changing field. And even this information will be updated and iterated on week to week moving forward. So I can put up a slide after this just about what's coming next with the speaker series. But first, I have a question that I'll ask. And then if anyone else has a question, one of my coworkers, Michael Kelman, can unmute you if you click that yes button. If you click on participants and click that yes button, if you have questions now. And I also recognize we're kind of like butting up against, we're at 15 minutes, so I don't want to keep folks longer than that 1 hour block. So we might want to save a lot of our questions for afterwards, and I totally get that. But one question on my mind is, people have been concerned about the liability side of this, right? What if, as an employer, I tried to do the right thing, and then an employee gets sick, am I liable? Employee's personal data is shared by accident or hacked, am I liable? And do we go to our kind of generic law firm that we work with on this? Do you guys have a stance on this? What's the risk side of this as we're trying to be good humans and protect our teams?
So
Go ahead, Steve.
Kim, I can take a crack at that. I'd say 2 things. One is in terms of the health and safety liability. So first of all, yes, you should always talk to your law firm. And just incidentally, so with our partnership with Wilson Sonsini, they actually have an email address called rtw@wstr.com. And they'll accept questions, and they have an expedited sort of client conflict check process. So people can feel free to ask questions there. I think 2 things. One, if someone gets sick and they're in the office, should be covered by workers' comp. There's some peculiarities here in California on whether you're presumptively if you got exposed in the office or not. So that should primarily cover if it seems like it was contracted at work. It's a little scary though, because right, there are other liabilities in play, tort-based, so negligence, right? So if the employer has not done some of the basics that we talked about, then you're subject to other types of claims that go beyond workers' comp. So be careful there. And then yes, on privacy, it always applies. The duty to maintain confidentiality and protect people's privacy is not alleviated in the face of a pandemic. As I said, you can ask the questions, but then you need to be sure that you have a very secure way to store the answers. Some of the things that we try to build into our tools.
Right, and I think for me, like a lot of the things that I'm hearing from just conversations I'm having with folks in the community outside of Stride, right, is that people really feel this pressure to have a quick solution. And, we are talking about personal private information here, right? And so I absolutely think that I would much prefer to get something more secure out there and keep folks at home for a little bit longer than to rush to get even a cohort of people back to the office and have something, especially the bigger company you are, there's going to be people with ill will out there that would like to get their hands on this information. And I think it's important to balance protecting folks and protecting our business. And it's very complicated. I don't have the answer, but in talking to people, I've definitely heard that concern. There's so many different angles to consider, both in the protecting the health and safety, and also the medium to long term. So there's, I mean, this is not an easy problem by any means. And so I'm looking here. I know we've kind of taken a lot of time to go through the content. I'm not seeing a lot of folks have vocal questions, so I'll just do one more call out, and I know Michael did as well. What I want to do right now, if I can, is quickly share my screen, and I will do that. Okay, so I want to, there we are. Magic. Okay, so the folks at Sequoia have given a much better URL for the Return to Work Center than the one I have up here. Sequoia.com/RTW, much easier to remember than this long one I wrote down. If anyone has any questions for Stride, my email is debbie@stridenyc.com. If it's about the speaker series, any software processes, or help with anything you guys are working on, feel free to reach out to me. And in 2 days, we actually have Charlie O'Donnell, who is the founder of Brooklyn Bridge Ventures, talking about the critical importance of not fearing failure, but actually embracing failure. And fun fact, the very first iteration of Stride Consulting, we're now 6 years in, about 85 employees, and we're a software consulting company. The very first time we opened our doors, we were a fractional executive coaching company. And it was thanks to my meeting with Charlie O'Donnell back in 2014, where I actually completely pivoted Stride as a result of a 15-minute conversation with this man. And he really helped me see the company in a perspective that I had just simply hadn't been looking at before. So absolutely worth 30 to 60 minutes of your time. I would encourage you guys to all go and sign up. He is an amazing human being and very entertaining to listen to. So with that, I'll close out. I will stop sharing my screen and close out and say thank you so much for everyone for spending this hour with us. I hope you stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope everyone had a very relaxing as possible weekend, and I hope to see you soon. So take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.